Hi, I'm Jim Tidwell, and I'm the chair of the School of Aquaculture and Aquatic Sciences here at Kentucky State University. Here at the Aquaculture Research Center, we've been working for over 30 years now to try to develop aquatic crops as production options for Kentucky farmers, and in fact for farmers around the country and around the world. The program dates back to the mid-'80s. Dr. Harold Benson had the idea of developing the program. He started that process in about 1985. I came here in 1987, and the program has continued to grow and is one of the top 3 aquaculture programs in the United States. Well respected, well thought of in terms of our research, our teaching, and our extension outreach activities. Okay, what we're going to talk about a little bit today is a big 30,000 foot flyover of aquaculture. I'm going to talk a little bit about aquaculture worldwide, then we'll start to focus down a bit, talk a little bit about aquaculture and its role in providing fish and fish consumption in the United States, and then we'll focus down a bit more on Kentucky, and then I'll tell you a bit about our program specifically here at Kentucky State University. Fish provides over 20% of the world's protein. Other parts of the world, it's a much more consumed product than it is here basically in Kentucky. In the U.S., we eat between 15 and 16 pounds of fish per person per year. Other countries, especially Asian countries, several of them eat over 100 pounds of fish per person per year. The blue planet that we live on has always been thought to be a limitless supply of fish. 3/4 of the planet is covered in ocean. If we needed more fish, we simply got a bigger boat or a faster boat or a bigger net, and we were able to go out and capture more fish. What's what we call a capture fisheries. So since we had what seemed like a limitless ocean, we thought we had a limitless supply of fish. However, we found that that is not the case. The humans are very efficient hunters, and they're able to find new fisheries, which is a population of fish, and go out and capture those fisheries and put such pressure on them that many of them cannot sustain the harvest pressure that's put on them. So that now most of our wild fisheries, over 3/4 of them, are at what we call maximum sustainable yields, in that we're capturing all the fish we can capture without actually depleting the populations, which we have done with a number of species such as the codfish over the generations. Well, there's only 2 sources of fish that we have. We can either capture them from the wild or we can raise them on a farm. And as I said, the demand for fish actually is increasing every year. A lot of this is driven by population growth. So we need more fish every year, but we found that the oceans cannot yield more fish than they're yielding right now, and some of those cannot yield continuously what we're already asking of them. So the only other source of fish and fish protein is for them to be raised on the farm, and that's what we call aquaculture. So this graph captures where are we now. This is a percentage, so it's not so much that capture fisheries are decreasing, it's that the proportion, the percentage of the human food supply that's coming from capture fisheries is decreasing. So this is the percent of the world food fish sourced from either capture fisheries or aquaculture. So you can see that capture fisheries is providing a smaller percentage each year, and aquaculture is providing an increasing percentage each year. Like the map in the mall, I put a point on there that says, you are here. So we're at a point right now where about 50% of our fish comes from wild capture fisheries, and about 50% comes from aquaculture. Well, what happens next year? Next year, aquaculture will provide 52. The year after that, 54. Because the capture fisheries are basically flatline. They're producing all they can produce, but the demand is increasing each year. That means that aquaculture has to produce an increasing proportion of the world food fish supply every year for the foreseeable future. What this means is aquaculture is the fastest growing animal food producing activity in the world. It's grown every year for really over 20 years and expected to hold this pace for at least another 20 years, according to the FAO, which is the Food and Agriculture Organization, which is part of the United Nations network that is there to look at the food supply for the human population and look in big round numbers at what a lot of different crops, not just what fish is doing, but can we feed all the people on this planet in the next coming decades. So this graph is to put it in a context that we can understand better here in the U.S. and even specifically in Kentucky. How big a deal can this aquaculture thing be? We don't see that much of it when we're driving down the interstate in Kentucky or even in the U.S. So really it can't be that big a deal. Well, the graph in the middle of this slide shows farmed fish versus beef. We passed beef 6 years ago in terms of the amount of protein and food that's generated on fish farms versus cattle farms. And look at that fish line is on a straight up. So we actually produce more fish now than we do beef on the planet. This is worldwide production. What are some of the reasons that fish are attractive in terms of farm animals, and especially in the future as our resources become more limiting? And a lot of people, when you are driving down the interstate, they see all these big fields of corn and big fields of soybeans. What most people don't realize is most of that corn and soybeans is not going to the farmer's market or to Kroger in the grocery store. Most of that is going to feed livestock, a big proportion of it. Well, if that's a limited resource, we need to get the most out of that, those feedstuffs that we can. So FCR, that is feed conversion ratio. That's how many pounds of feed we have to feed to an animal to put on a pound of gain, a pound of flesh and protein to be generated. So with a cow, it takes about 10 pounds of feed to put a pound of gain on cattle. With pigs, that FCR, the feed conversion ratio, is about 3.5. Takes 3.5 pounds of feed to produce a pound of gain. Chickens are pretty good. It takes about 2 pounds of feed for a pound of gain, but look at fish. Fish, it only takes 1.5 pounds of feed to put on a pound of gain. So almost 1/10 of what it takes in cattle and less than half of what it takes in pork. So what do things look like at the U.S. level, domestic seafood consumption? Where is all our seafood? And the U.S. is a fairly big seafood consumer, but it's an even bigger seafood importer. Right now, over 90% of the seafood that we consume in the United States is imported. That leads to a trade deficit. We do export some seafood, but we import a lot more seafood than we export. The difference in those two numbers is the trade deficit in seafood, and that's now over $11 billion and actually approaching $12 billion per year that we import more than we export. So much is coming in from overseas. Some of that is from countries that really don't necessarily like the U.S. all that much. And one of my big issues with this is not just the economic impacts, but the potential impacts on our food supply. Food safety is a very big concern. A lot of those places don't have the same standards that we have as far as environmental standards, don't have the same rules and regulations that we have as far as what chemicals or antibiotics may be able to be used in production there. And that's coming here and going right into our seafood supply. And it's also a very open door if somebody wanted to be able to do bad things to the U.S. population. But less than 2% of that imported seafood gets inspected by the FDA as it's coming into our food chain here in the U.S. So if we're not producing very much of our own seafood here and we're importing a big proportion of it, where's it coming from? Well, the biggest aquaculture producer in the world is China. Almost 2/3 of the world's aquaculture is produced in the country, the country of China. If we add in 2 or 3 other Asian countries right there around China, like Indonesia, Malaysia, and other countries like Vietnam, it's almost 90%. Almost 90% of the world's aquaculture occurs in those Asian countries, especially South Asia. So they are the major producers of fish products, and a lot of shellfish. So why there? I call it the Walmart syndrome. Why, when I go in Walmart, is everything from underwear to lawn furniture produced in China? They can do it cheaper because of another number of reasons, whether it be how much they pay their workers, or centralization of the government making large-scale decisions. They don't have to have a hearing on moving a town and building a dam and put in a big fish farm. If the government says do it, they do it. They'll build a feed mill, they do it. But they also understand capitalism quite well. So they're a combination of a very strong centralized government, but supposedly communism, but understand the making of money better and better, it seems, each year. So the same reason a lot of the things that we buy in Walmart come from China is the same set of reasons that a lot of our seafood comes from China and Southern Asia. Okay, we talked about the food safety aspects of importing so much of our seafood from overseas, and not only overseas, but literally from the other side of the planet. Get a globe and spin it around, and you can't get much further from the U.S. than China and some of these Asian countries that are big aquaculture producers. In the U.S., when we talk about environmental concerns of food and food transportation, we raise it far away from where it's consumed. We have a term we talk about: food miles. So in the U.S., much of our food was raised in the big Central Valley of California, or coming in out-of-season production from countries like Mexico, where it's warm in our winter. So people have looked at these issues and calculated the average food item on the U.S. dinner plate traveled 1,500 miles before it wound up on your plate. And if you think about things like the carbon that was released into the atmosphere, burning the fuel to transport that food 1,500 miles, you look at carbon footprints, those are things that have to be calculated into the environmental impact as well. Well, the average seafood item traveled over 6,000 miles to get from one of those Asian countries to the fish that's on your plate when you consume it. But it's hard to compete economically with China. So a lot of what we do here is we've tried to develop seafood items that can be produced locally and sold locally, because some of the things that can't be shipped readily in seafood into the United States are items like fresh or even live seafood items. So we've tried to concentrate on those in some of our research because we don't have to go head to head with China for fresh and live product. and try to find markets who prefer those and willing to pay for them. So here's an aerial view of the Aquaculture Research Center at Kentucky State University. It's the only such facility in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, and actually the only such facility found in several of the contiguous states around Kentucky. So we're definitely designated as the lead institution in aquaculture in Kentucky, but in some ways we're almost a regional program in that we serve and service a lot of the states around us as well at the same time. The basic infrastructure of the center was begun in 1985, has continued to grow and expand and improve and update in that time. Mm-hmm. A lot of our emphasis, especially research-wise, has been to try to develop species that are ideally suited for our climate. Most of U.S. aquaculture in early years has been industries like channel catfish industry. That's a warm water species raised in ponds, and the production of the channel catfish is in states like Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Arkansas, some in Texas. Our deep south states that have warmer temperatures because this is a warm water fish. Kentucky's further north, so a lot of our research has tried to look at what we call cool water species that will utilize and grow efficiently at cooler water temperatures. Fish and shellfish, like even freshwater shrimp and crawfish, are all cold-blooded animals. So they are adapted to temperatures. They don't manipulate temperatures. They can't keep their body warm in the winter. So the temperature dictates their physiology rather than the other way around. So we've tried to find species better suited to these cooler water conditions and evaluate them as culture species, but also in terms of the marketing conditions in the region, or produce fish that are more in demand, that we're closer to those major markets. And we'll touch on a couple of those as we work through the species we've worked on here. So one of those species is the largemouth bass. This is the same fish that we go to, we fish for in the lakes and reservoirs. The fish can be trained to take pelleted feeds when it's 2 inches, 1.5, 2 inches long. They can be imprinted on feed, and they will retain that learned behavior all the way through grow out. This is a species that does well at our temperatures and mid-70s rather than the high 80s like some of the other species. It's also a species that can be sold into large urban, especially Asian urban concentrations, those being in Chicago, Toronto, especially these days New York. And we're a day's drive closer to those markets than some of the bigger producers like Arkansas. So this is a species that we've worked on quite a bit. It also doesn't require a processing plant to turn them into fillets or nuggets. They want to buy the fish live. So we load the fish right out of the pond, right into a big 18-wheeler, no processing plant, direct to the markets, and it's well suited to our climatic conditions here. Some of the things we've had to look at research-wise, right now we're using very high-dollar feeds on this fish, but some of the research we've done shows that we could very likely substantially reduce those feed costs, which should improve profitability for our producers. So we talk about food miles. What if we dealt in food feet? One of the other areas of research that we're working on is aquaponics. That is where we raise our fish in the tank. We feed them feeds hopefully made with local products that we have trust in the integrity of the ingredients going into that. But rather than using big mechanical filters and biofilters and UV sterilizers and all the mechanical approaches to this. What if we just did what Mother Nature does, which is the waste of the fish being actually a fertilizer for the plants that take up those waste as nitrate fertilizer, as phosphorus, and then turn that into a second crop, like let's say Bib lettuce is one of the best ones for these type systems. And when the plants remove these fertilizers, these nutrients, to turn it into lettuce, they've cleaned the water. And now that water can be recycled back to the fish tank where we feed the fish, and this water is recycled over and over, reused and recleaned the same way Mother Nature does it with a nitrogen cycle where those are taken up by plants, clean the water, and back to the fish. This is called aquaponics. It's a combination of aquaculture and hydroponic beds of growing vegetables, and this can be done very close to the market. This is of high interest to urban agriculture type applications, where we're taking two of the things that physicians want us to eat more of, which is fresh fruit, fresh vegetables, and more fish, and taking the production of those two healthy products close to the demand, especially close to demand in food desert type situations where they have poor access to healthy foods, and getting these close together. So, what is America's favorite seafood? The number one seafood item consumption-wise in the United States is shrimp. What if we could produce that shrimp, again, very close to demand? People would get high value, high quality, fresh, even live shrimp, harvested the day before, and that shrimp's traveled 5, 10, 15 miles rather than 6,000. What if we could raise shrimp with basically no bycatch? A lot of people promote wild shrimp, and that's fine, and they talk about the environmental impacts of shrimp farms, but trust me, wild shrimp has its own environmental impacts. When you pull that big trawl across the bottom of the bay or the water right offshore, you catch 10 pounds of fish for every pound of shrimp that comes out of that. And most of that 10 pounds of fish are juvenile fish, and quite often juvenile sport fish. So it's not like wild capture has no environmental impact. If we do shrimp culture well and in controlled conditions, we can greatly minimize any environmental impact in their production. Some of our other most promising areas of research at the Aquaculture Research Center is Aquaculture Genetics. This is headed up by Dr. Boris Gamelski. In aquaculture, we're primarily working with what would be considered wild fish. Our brood stock, in some cases, come directly from the wild. Even if we use brood stock that have been spawned on the farm, most of those have not been selected to be improved brood stock. Most of the improvements in other animal agriculture, chickens, beef, pork, and others, there's been a lot of genetic improvements. And I'm not talking about molecular manipulations. I'm not talking about genetically modified. I'm talking about just classic selection, where we have a fast-growing female and we have a fast-growing male that we put together to produce fast-growing offspring, just genetic selection. However, these days we have molecular tools that allow us to do that much more efficiently than we have in the past. So we're thinking that this will be the promising area of research in the future, that we can produce domesticated lines of these different aquatic crops and produce lines that are more well adapted to a farm situation, that can tolerate those farm conditions without getting disease problems, and also breed for stocks that can utilize different feeds and feed types. For example, largemouth bass right now requires a lot of fish meal in the diet since he's a predator? Can we breed for a bass that would use more plant-based crops in the feed without compromising the fish growth and final quality of the product at the end? A lot of our research also looks at alternative feed ingredients. We're, as a animal production agriculture, we're primarily turning feed into flesh. Feed costs are our primary cost, well over 50% in most of our species. So we're always looking for high quality, well-performing, and hopefully low-cost ingredients to go into those feeds. One of the ones that we've worked on in recent years is things like algae production. Kentucky's considered a coal state. One of the ways that they've tried to generate what they call clean coal is to be able to strip the carbon out of the smokestacks when an electrical producing plant burns coal to boil the water, make steam, and turn the generators. One of the best ways and really the only practical way to remove the carbon from that flue gas is to flow it through big vats of algae. The algae as a plant type species pulls in the carbon dioxide. That's what they breathe in, and they breathe out oxygen. So they can actually be used to remove carbon dioxide, CO2, from the flue gases. And then that algae can be used, we pull the lipids out of it, and that can be turned into a biofuel, like we do French fry oil. It can be used to produce a lipid that we can burn in different kinds of internal combustion. It can very readily be made into a jet fuel. But after those lipids are removed and used in other applications, pharmaceuticals, biofuels, the algae meal that remains can be a high protein, readily accepted feed ingredient for aquatic species like fish and shrimp. And that's some of the research that we're doing in our nutrition lab over here, headed up by Dr. Rossi. The channel catfish has long been our number one aquaculture species in the U.S. They really have had a hard 10 years or so. Feed costs have gone up. The production cost thereby goes up with that. There's also been a lot of import price pressure from species being imported from those Asian countries we talked about. Our conditions are well suited in western Kentucky for the production of catfish, and we've had catfish production grow up in western Kentucky around the Jackson Purchase region. So we're looking at new technologies that would better utilize our water resources there to produce more fish per acre of pond that we have available. Kentucky tends to have smaller ponds, so we tend to have to be more efficient and get greater production per acre out of our ponds. Dr. Simmons is looking at these floating raceways, which is a way to intensify the catfish production in the existing waters that we have. No matter what species we grow, no matter what feed ingredient we evaluate, it's not enough to know that the fish grew faster or reached market size or maybe the feed was cheaper. We have to actually do the economics of that production. We have to know, did we save money or bottom line make more money at the end? Also, as we develop these new species, we have to look at things like what's the proper product form, what size fish do different markets desire, what type of fish do different markets desire. Hispanics may want a 3/4 pound tilapia that still has the scales on it. The American consumer may want a boneless fillet that's got lemon pepper marinade, and that's the only way they'll use it is take home, almost quick to prepare, almost ready to eat. So that falls under the area of economics and marketing research, and that's led here by Dr. Siddhis Gupta. All animals get sick. That's why UK and Lake Murray work together in Western Kentucky for disease diagnostic laboratories. The Diagnostic Lab for aquatic animals, for fish and shrimp raised in Kentucky, and this is one of those programs that actually has a very regional impact, is here at Kentucky State University. Our Fish Disease Diagnostic Lab and the disease courses and related activities, especially extension and outreach, are led here by Dr. Bob Derborough. KSU also has the largest offering of internet-based distance learning aquaculture courses, really, of any university in the United States and possibly in the world. We use a video format. It's like going to class, but maybe better in many ways. You can watch it, rewatch it if you need to. We have action B-roll and illustrations and to better explain some of the concepts. They can be viewed as podcasts. We have courses in water quality, fish disease, principles of aquaculture, genetics, reproduction, aquaculture production methods, and a recent launch of an aquaponics course. Most of these are offered at both the undergraduate and graduate student levels, and we've had over 1,000 students now take our online courses. So where have those students been? We've had students in over 40 of the U.S. states take KSU aquaculture courses online, and over 30 countries around the world. So we really have been able to broaden and widen the impact of aquaculture education here at Kentucky State University. Something we didn't expect. It's also been one of the best things we ever did to get KSU undergraduate students involved. The Aquaculture Research Center is just a little ways off campus, but that barrier's been enough that a lot of the students weren't readily able to get over to the center where we teach our classes. So it's greatly increased the participation of KSU undergraduate students in our academic offerings. Here at Kentucky State, our academics are part of the College of Agriculture, Community, and the Environment. We have an undergraduate certificate that you can get entirely online. It doesn't have to be entirely online, but you can complete it entirely online with 12 credit hours of undergraduate classes. We have a aquaculture systems option that's offered as part of the AFE degree, the Ag, Food, and Environment degree, and we also offer the Masters of Aquaculture and Aquatic Studies at the graduate level. That's a quick overview of aquaculture. Aquaculture at the worldwide level, aquaculture at the U.S. level, aquaculture at the Kentucky level, and aquaculture programs and offerings here at Kentucky State University. The hub of the wheel for us information-wise is our website. You can find out more about all the things that we just talked about and more at www.ksuaquaculture.org. I hope that's been helpful. Jim Tidwell, it's been a pleasure to be with you.